Good evening and welcome to Tuning Up with Iggy and Dave. I am Dave Moss, the Executive Director of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. Coming to you live from the historic Hawaii Theater Center. Wow, that shirt is busy. Sorry, just got a glimpse of that. My apologies, my Christmas Aloha shirt here. Thank you to my wife for this. Iggy.
Hello, Dave.
Good to see you. Busy week, eh?
Well, busy for you.
Well,
Did everyone catch everything that you could catch on TV this past week? We had last night Ron Artis II.
Yes.
We had the Nutcracker.
Saturday evening.
Yes, and there will be reruns in case you missed it, right?
Reruns of the HSO. I like the sounds of that. Yeah.
And very nice, beautiful, bright, colorful shirt. I wanted to provide a contrast myself. You know, the bright side and the dark side here. But I digress. We have a very special guest tonight. We've had musicians, we've had guest artists, we've had associates of the orchestra before, but tonight we're very happy to welcome Dr. Mari Yoshihara, who are a true fan, an engaged audience member, a true faithful of the orchestra. I've known you for quite a long time. You know a lot of musicians in the orchestra. You've kept in touch with musicians who've left the orchestra.
Who left the orchestra without my permission.
That's right, and without mine either. You know a lot of the repertoire, and you're an accomplished pianist. So we wanted to get a perspective from not the stage, but a perspective from the audience. And welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's very nice to be on this side. I always watch, from the screen, and I feel that this is the first time I've met Dave in person, but I feel like I know him very well because I watch him every week and send him my,
So what happened is that actually Mari texted me and said, I want to meet Dave. My dream is to meet Dave. So we made it happen today.
Thank you.
We make dreams come true here at the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. If anybody else would like to meet me, we'll put Iggy's phone number at the bottom of the screen here, and we can arrange that. How's that sound, Iggy?
That sounds very good. So, the easy part was for us to watch the Nutcracker and Ron Artis II, but how many hours of sleep have you had the last, 2 months?
Last 2 months? Oh, I'm averaging a healthy amount, I would say, but I am very much looking forward to a little bit of downtime the next week here over the holidays to spend some time with my family and kind of recharge for everything that's coming in the new year for us here at the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. There's been a lot of exciting developments in and around the symphony, none of which we'll share tonight. So for those of you who feel like we tease you with details, none of that's coming tonight. This is all about now, the present, enjoying what we have, but it's been a busy 2 months, and I'm really tremendously proud of the way the organization has continued to adapt to the challenges. There has not been a single week or a single performance or even a single day at this point where anything we do is, quote, normal. And I again, the whole staff, especially the musicians, and I'm just tremendously proud of all that we've done and accomplished in 2020.
That's right. The musicians, we like to have advance notice when we prepare our parts, because when we first get together for the first rehearsal is not the first time we have our music. We actually have our music ahead of time, and because of the pandemic, we've had to adjust a little bit. Sometimes we get our music very late. We were mentioning the Ron Artis II show, how some of those charts, the ink was still fresh. So, Mari, I wanted to ask you, so you've started to attend concerts of the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra since the early 2000s. Of course, this fall you've attended faithfully the concerts, the live stream.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us How did it feel at first? Was it sort of an adjustment? Where did you find things that were very actually interesting, or
there are a lot of I love a lot of things about the online concerts. I mean, of course, it's different from the live experience of sitting in the hall and watching you on stage. It's different from that. But there are a lot of nice things about online concerts. For one thing, I can be in my t-shirt and shorts or my pajamas or whatever, and if I have to go to the bathroom, I can go to the bathroom anytime, which is something I always worry.
When we tune the orchestra, you can go to the bathroom.
Right.
And there's no line in your apartment for the bathroom, right?
Exactly. Or I can be eating, but also being able to see everything up close. Like for instance, for that harp solo, I've never seen harp solo. I mean, I've seen harp solo being performed on stage, but it's rather far, and this was the first time that I really got to see the instrument, how the instrument works, and it's a beautiful instrument, just visually and physically beautiful instrument, and and also just the orchestra members too, like you zoom the camera, great job, camera, like it's very well done. So yeah, there are actually things that we get to enjoy because it's an online format and not the live concert. But I think, having experienced this, once we get back to normal, we'll be able to appreciate the live performances even more now that we've had this different right. experience.
Now, I mentioned how you're a big fan of the symphony, but you actually also make a living, and I forgot to introduce you as professor of American Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. We like to ask our guests about their upbringing. Tell us a bit about your life story. Did you grow up wanting to be a musician? Did you grow up wanting to be a writer? And when did those two kind of meet each other?
All right, how many minutes do we have? So I was born in New York because of my father's job. He worked for a Japanese import-export company. So I was born in New York but grew up in Tokyo most of my life. And I started taking piano lessons when I was 3 because my mother, wanted me to have, it's a very common story of people, especially girls of my generation in Japan at the time.
Okay.
Everybody basically took piano lessons. Everybody.
Not just like any musical instrument, but it had to be
mostly
piano?
Piano was definitely the most common instrument. Some violin, but piano was, this was a period when piano, especially upright piano, became very accessible to the middle class, public. And so the families who did not necessarily grow up with a musical background were very eager. It was part of a middle class status thing, right? So I started taking piano lessons at 3, and but I was 3, so it's not like I was eager to do it. It was my mom. As was common for many people. But I was reasonably good at it, and I didn't hate it, so I practiced enough to get reasonably good. So I was fairly serious about it throughout my childhood, and so I practiced several hours every day. That was just part of my life.
But that's not what every student in Japan does, practicing several hours a day, or is it?
Well, serious students do that. Serious students, I'm sure, do more. But I was when I was around 10, 11, 12, I was probably practicing 3 hours a day or something, which is, serious but not extraordinary. There are other kids.
But then isn't school longer in Japan?
School is longer, yeah.
So how many hours are they in a day in Japan?
I think 24.
Okay.
Yeah, last time I checked. Yeah, but anyway, so the point is, I was a fairly serious and reasonably good piano student throughout my childhood, and then throughout my teenage years. I lived in California. This is an aside, but I lived in California for a few years when I was 11 to 13, again because of my father's job. And then afterwards, we moved back to Japan again. Continued with piano, but that was around the time when I started to realize that, I was still doing piano and I liked it, but I started realizing that there is life other than piano, too. And especially because by then I was fluent in English, having lived in California for a few years. And so that sort of opened up some parts of the world that I wasn't familiar with, or I didn't imagine for myself, like career paths and life options outside of music. So I kept taking piano lessons, but I made a conscious choice not to go to a music school, music conservatory, as a piano major. I went to a regular academic school, University of Tokyo, studied American Studies, and then I was taking private piano lessons all throughout, but I wasn't as serious. I mean, by then it was just kind of a hobby, fairly casual hobby. And then after graduating from the university, I came to the United States. I did my master's and PhD at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, again in American Studies, and then got the job here at University of Hawaii in '97, and I've been basically here since. So since I chose not to go into music school, I had sort of, piano became a much smaller part of my life for a good 20 years or so. 20 years or so. Once I started my job here, I was a scholar of American Studies, like U.S. history, cultural studies, etc. But for the most part, that research, my scholarship or teaching had nothing to do with music. Mm-hmm. And then after I wrote my first book and got tenure at the University of Hawaii, I gradually got back into music again, partly because I was a little bit more stable, I had more time. I bought a Yamaha Clavinova and just started playing a little bit again. And then that was around the time when I realized that, well, maybe I could combine my academic interests in American Studies and cultural history and, cultural politics, etc., with my musical past, which that's how I thought of it then. And so that's when I started my second research project, and that's what brought me to you. That was, as I was saying, I found that the first time I met Iggy was in September 2004, when I interviewed him for my project. This is the second book that I published called Musicians from a Different Shore. It's about Asians and Asian Americans in classical music. So this was a study of how Asians, and I'm sure all the viewers of this show are familiar, like Asians and Asian Americans are overrepresented in terms of the numbers in the world of classical music. So it's partly kind of a history of how that came about, that phenomenon came about, but also mostly about how Asian and Asian American musicians themselves think about the relationship between their music making and their racial and cultural identity. Right? Right. So that's when I approached you. So Iggy is in this book.
Well, I have to say there are a lot of very interesting people in that book, and I'm only there because I forgot, what did you call it? I'm a hybrid version of the American immigrant, because I'm not actually. Yeah. But anyway, what you mentioned reminds me, there's a little bit of a parallel with Dave in that you have a musical background and you went to university and your PhD was not in music. And Dave, you also have a very strong, of course, musical background, but you got a master's, an MBA, in an MBA, which is not music. But both of you, music never left you. Is that correct? Dave, when you started your MBA, did you know that you wanted to do music administration?
No.
Or was it the path was open?
The path was very much open, and I would actually say, and I quite regularly do, that my intention was to become a supporter of music from the boardroom or from just the audience, was sort of my intention kind of when I went into the MBA program, and just kind of kept being pulled back into opportunities in arts and culture and particularly with live entertainment and music. So for me, it was actually the last 9 months have been the longest period in my life where I haven't played with anyone, I haven't sat down and read chamber music, I haven't I've actually only touched my instrument twice in the last.
Which is the viola, because
yes.
you play a couple of instruments.
Well, I can play the violin if it's the right gig.
But you also play keyboard, right?
Yes, I do. I don't really count that, though, for some reason. For me, that I don't know why that is, but it always has been like a separate, maybe to me, it's very mechanical, because I don't, it's a harpsichord.
Oh, it's so I just want to, veer off, sidetrack a little bit. We are not talking politics here. However, Mari, you have hard-earned a PhD from a university, which reminds me of a op-ed article from by a professor at Northwestern who was mentioning, First Lady-elect, Dr. Jill Biden, and mentioned that I frankly, I don't know everything. I read some headlines, but the mention was that maybe she didn't need to bear that title anymore. Do you have any perspective or opinion on that?
I didn't actually read the article. I've read enough mentions of it to stay away from it because I would probably get too upset. But having a doctorate does not. I think I've seen somebody write this somewhere, maybe tweet or something. Having a doctorate does not make you any smarter or any more important or any more authoritative than anybody else, but it does make you a doctor. I mean, that's what it is. Like, you spend years in school, like you go through this rigorous and systematized study, and you take exams, and you do your thesis, dissertations, etc., and you earn the doctorate, and therefore that you are a doctor, and you have every right to use the title when you want to.
That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, at UH in the music department, so my students call me Mr. Iggy, and my colleagues, they call them, Professor Jeff, and if you have a doctorate, then they call them Dr. Joe. So they go by first name, but they're still that title before. That book you just mentioned, I actually did read it, but it's been a few years. And it's a very interesting topic, the overabundance of Asian Americans, or maybe sometimes Asians in classical work. Did you come to any conclusion, or is it because of the background that we had, or?
Well, part of what I demonstrate in the book is that it had to do, and it's very specifically East Asian, right? I mean, not that there aren't other kinds of Asians in classical music, South Asians and Southeast Asians, but just in terms of the numbers, it's really predominantly, and it's different which period you're looking at, right? So first wave was the Japanese, and then came the Koreans, and now it's really predominantly the Chinese. If you look at, for instance, the number of students in conservatories, right? I mean, it's really predominantly Chinese. So it has a lot to do with basically socioeconomics and history. Right? In Japan, as I mentioned about my own background, it has everything to do with sort of the middle class status and economic growth in post-war Japan. And the same thing in South Korea a little bit later, and then now with the economic rise of China, it has become this huge both market for classical music and the place where music and musicians are produced. So yeah, it has a lot to do with sort of political economy.
Dave, your alma mater, Juilliard, opened a school in China, is that correct?
In China, yes, absolutely. A second campus in China just about 2 or 3 years ago at this point. And it was really interesting to see that come together and that to be the focus for the organization. I don't really know that much more about it, but I think it's something that really, in getting to know the Hawaii Symphony here, I think one of the things that being new to this community, even the first time my wife and I came to visit, was how here in Hawaii we look so much towards Asia, as much as we do, it feels to someone new here still, to mainland USA. And I think that I'm curious how you, being here in Hawaii, how have you seen that play out?
In terms of music, classical
Yes,
music?
yeah.
Or that's an interesting question. To be honest, I didn't really think about that too much because here, because of the demographics of Hawaii, people don't really think a whole lot about the fact that, like people on the continent think about it more.
Mm-hmm.
It's more noticeable because in terms of the population, it's fairly small, it's less than, much less than 10% of the overall population. But if you look at, major symphony orchestra, especially the string section, or if you look at the conservatories, piano and strings, and perhaps voice, maybe, it's really, the Asians are overrepresented relative to the population. So people notice it more. Here, people don't really, I don't think people think of it as strange or odd. So I didn't actually think of that too much in terms
maybe
of
there's
context
more
of Hawaii.
integration maybe in Hawaii? Assimilation?
Maybe. There's just more, just Asians are more
Higher
present in all,
population.
not just in classical music, but
Okay.
in all areas of life. And then there are, of course, many other groups that are not represented, right? like Native Hawaiians, for instance.
Yeah.
They're, so it's not, I'm not saying that Hawaii is some sort of utopian multicultural paradise. There's definitely, inequalities and, things like, disparities in terms of access to music education, performance, etc. But in terms of the place of Asians and Asian Americans, I think in Hawaii it's kind of differently perceived and felt than elsewhere.
Yeah.
I noticed that, and this is a Christmas week. We're all supposed to be very cheerful and not so serious. But this is a very interesting topic. When I grew up in France, that was in the early 70s. And so there weren't that many Asians in my hometown, which is about 200,000 inhabitants. And then we moved to Paris, or I moved with my sister and my mom, and with my dad would be around. But there wasn't too much cultural exchange. There was a little bit. And then I came to the U.S., to the mainland, and to those music schools where you had a much higher density of Asian students, either Asian Americans from the U.S. or from Asia. So that was frankly an adjustment for me, and even moving here to Hawaii was also an adjustment just because I grew up in France. So it's from within, this perspective, and not so much what you can read or see on TV. It's just your own personal experience, and it doesn't matter where you're coming from and what you look like. Your personal experience can be very unique and unexpected. Why can you, Mari? I wanted to ask you. Music is universal, however, because the heritage is so European. There's so much, the Asians revere the training in Europe. I thought there was a while ago that the Japanese and the Koreans and now the Chinese, they really revere the tradition in Europe. But you have a split of Asians studying either in Europe or in the US or in Russia. So those three places, Europe, Russia, Russia's Europe, but you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
and the U.S. Did you feel that, like when you were a kid, and people were saying, "Where are you going to study? Are you going?" Or, I guess maybe you were too young to think about those things or to notice where people were going to study.
People who studied music, like when I was a kid, people who were really serious in going into music and who were serious enough to go study abroad, they tended to think of Germany as sort of the ideal destination. There's a strong German tradition in Japanese music education. Not for everybody, but I think it had to do with who brought Western music to Japan in the first place, and like what kinds of teachers came to teach and stuff. So yeah, the German tradition tend to be seen as sort of the most orthodox. But at the same time, with people like Seiji Ozawa and people who I think it depends on what school you go to, what kind of, I mean, both school in the literal sense, like what college or what university, what conservatory you go to, but also like schools of, piano playing or violin playing or whatever, and also who you study with. If you happen to study with a teacher who studied in the United States, through that teacher you have more connections, that's personal or directly or indirectly connection to the U.S. Field. So you might think of U.S. as more kind of familiar. So I think it has a lot to do with those kinds of personal connection or lineage, maybe.
So you mentioned schools, like the teaching, like perhaps a way of learning an instrument. I think this is something that our audience might be interested in hearing. And I know it so closely to violin schools, Galamian kind of. Can you, Iggy, kind of talk us through, just pick 3 of your favorite violin schools, and maybe, even, because it's how you hold the instrument, it's how, especially in the bow arm, can you?
Well, I mean, yeah, so you mentioned Ivan Galamian, an immigrant from maybe Russia, or anyway, moved to New York, to Juilliard. So it's like Perlman, Pinka Zuckerman, Dorothy DeLay. It's from that lineage. Then in France, you had the Franco-Belgium school, Lisaï, Kurzer, and Pierre Rod. Maybe not Kurzer, but Pierre Rod. That lineage is very, very strong. And then in Russia, Brodsky and Auer, and then you have a very strong Jewish epicenter, Heifetz and others, Milstein. I mean, they ended up in the U.S., of course, but I mean, there's the place, I forgot exactly where, it's not Moscow, but another place in Eastern Europe where that was very, very important, of course. But, like maybe if you see someone with a high wrist, maybe Russian school. If you see someone who holds the bow like this, but with the index finger a little bit apart from the other fingers and very strong sound, that's New York, right? It's just a very strong sound, very clear. And,
Mr. Perlman.
Yeah. And they say sometimes kind of a fluffiness of the French school, which sometimes I agree, but sometimes I don't agree.
If you listen to the Piazzolla from the most recently on demand, there's nothing fluffy about that. So
yeah, because you need technique,
Yeah.
you need brain, and you need heart, and so it's whatever comes out, right? But maybe there's a stereotype. Maybe I'm sure, Mari, you could go on and on about stereotypes, but I love soccer. And one of the greatest soccer player in France is Zidane, and he's very elegant in his way of playing. It's nothing like maybe the Brazilian who were, but then it's another stereotype, right? Corinne, we have a French intern, and she loves Zidane, Platini, all those great. In fact, there's such great soccer players from France that they are artists. Anyway, Mari. What do you have to say about stereotypes?
What do I have to say about stereotypes?
Is it anchored in reality? Is it legitimate? Is it just totally out of line?
Well, it's mostly out of line, but they emerge not because they are accurate or true, but they do emerge out of some context, right? So they're not entirely, they're not just fabricated, independent of anything else. Like it emerges at a particular period for particular reasons, different motives, So
I think that there's one stereotype that I feel that the American culture doesn't care about classical music and the future of symphonic repertoire. Coming from the background of American studies and American history and all of those sorts of things, what What's your take on that? Where is that coming from currently, and do we have any chance? And if so, what can we do to be on the other side of that?
I don't know if that's a stereotype or if it's like a cultural condition that many people identify, right? And I think that, and it may depend on how you define like care, like, what does it mean to care about symphonic music? I think a lot of people do care about symphonic music. But I think in terms of, say, the number of people who would regularly buy ticket and go to a symphony concert, I think compared to many other places in the world, especially so-called first world nations, I think it is smaller, right? And also, I'm being very original in pointing this out, but they tend to be older and more wealthy classes of people for various reasons, various understandable reasons. But I think that is a reality. I think it has a lot to do with the state of music education. Not only in terms of like the professional level advanced music school, but those people people like Iggy and you like practice so many hours for so many years because you want to study. It's so hard, right, to do that. But so many young people are still doing it. They're dedicating. They're not doing soccer. Or they're not doing this and that. No, they're practicing their violin or piano because they love the music. That's so heartening, right? That so many people are still doing it, knowing I think many students do know the odds of making it as a professional performer, but they still do it because they love the music. So in that sense, I don't think classical music or symphonic music is any less, sort of loved or supported or cared about by American people. But those are relatively small segment of the larger population. To people like us who are sort of immersed in classical music, because we're surrounded by people like that, so we sort of tend to feel that there are many, many people, but in terms of the overall population, those are very specialized and small segment of the population. And the rest of the people, many of them, have either never heard, classical music or certainly never been to a live symphonic concert. For instance, at UH, I teach. I'm not a musicologist or music scholar. I research about and sometimes teach about music, but music as part of society and culture. So it's a different kind of class than what I would be teaching if I were a musicologist and teaching in a music school. But I sometimes teach an undergraduate class on American music and American culture. And a few times Iggy came as a guest speaker to talk about the symphony or talk about music, and sometimes do a little bit demonstration, like before he did the solo and stuff. And I also, in that class, as part of the class assignment, I make all my students come to the symphony, go to the symphony concert, and just write about their experience, right? And then I do a little bit of a background preparation because most of them don't even know what a concerto is, or they don't even know what a symphony is, and they certainly, most of the time, either all or almost all of the students have never been to a symphony concert before, and probably many of them never will after that. And that's okay. I wish that they would come more, but at least they've come once, right? And I make them write a short paper about their experience, not only about the music itself, because without much background, they can't talk about like sort of the details of the actual music or musical performance, but just the whole experience of going to the concert, what kinds of people they see in the audience, the whole ritual of, when to clap and nod, or, when to sit and stand and all that kind of stuff. And the papers I read from the students are just fascinating. And one thing I find quite touching is that these students, for the most part, they really enjoy the experience, for one thing. The bottom line is they enjoy the experience. I always worry because students tend to, students often have a hard time concentrating in a 50-minute class. So, can they concentrate and, sit, still for a 2-hour concert? But no, they mostly they enjoy the experience, and the kinds of things they write about are just fascinating, things that I already really take for granted because I'm a regular classical music, lover, and I take a lot of things for granted. But Yeah, so I think just the experience, like exposing them to this musical form and symphony concert as an experience is significant, even if it's only once in their lifetime.
From what you read, did you think that some of them felt a little intimidated at first?
Some of them wrote that they felt intimidated, they felt underdressed, they felt like, because a lot of the symphony goers are regulars, right? So when you go to Blaisdell, in front of the hall, like people are talking with each other because they recognize, but if they come for the first time and they don't know anybody, they feel kind of, isolated. They don't know what to do with themselves, or they don't know where to go, or so they feel a little intimidated. And many of them are older than undergraduate students.
So if you were in a boardroom with Dave, and you wanted to make them feel more comfortable, and what would you tell Dave? You would say, "Hey, Dave, I think we should fill in the blanks. Maybe have a matinee on a Saturday or Sunday, and make it really cash."
I think there should be a concert where you guys play in regular clothes.
Well, we almost do now. We have our nice Aloha shirts from Kala.
That was one of the things with our digital performances, that no one else can do that. I mean, they can, but only the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra can play an Aloha shirt.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But not even Aloha shirt.
Right.
But I mean, it doesn't have to be coordinated, like you just wear, because I think, watching people in, wearing tux and all that is, I mean, for some people like me, like I like the experience of doing something special and formal. But a lot of students feel kind of intimidated or out of place. But if you, play in regular, street clothes, that might make the musicians feel more, like regular people.
Well,
students love you coming to class, and then because it was when Iggy and Mark Vodopek played Brahms double. So both of them came to class to demonstrate a little bit, played a little bit, and then talk, and then the students went to the concert. And so by then, students were calling them Iggy and Mark, and so in their papers, like they all were. I mean, I told them to use. Well, it's standard practice, and if you're writing an academic paper, you use last names. So call them in the paper, call them Jan and Vodopek. But many of them wrote like Iggy and
Well,
Iggy
and it's important. It's important to have a personal experience. But what you mentioned about this casual experience reminds me of one of the experiences I had when I was working in England, either in London or in Bournemouth, and we had a couple concerts that were on a Saturday evening, and we had them, and dressed casually. We played at a nightclub, and apparently I didn't know because I don't live in England, but they hired a very, very famous DJ, and so there was some, music during the evening, but then there was also the portion where we had the symphony, and they were trying this format, very casual nightclub, like bright lights, and we would play Beethoven, I think, and then they would go back to the techno or whatever. And so I don't know how far that went because I decided to leave the orchestra. No, because I didn't go back there. But
the light effect that you've been doing in this concert has been great.
Well, you know why? Because we have really good professionals. That makes a lot of difference.
No, I've commented. I remember texting you after the concert, like that was good. It matches the music, and
it's about the experience and making people feel comfortable and being open to experiencing new things. And I think that I think one of our biggest challenges in this industry is that I would argue that not much has changed about attending a symphony orchestra concert since about 1920. Mm-hmm. And the music has changed. A lot of the music is the same. Beethoven's not going anywhere. But I think that there's a lot of insider baseball, from the ritual, as you said, of when to clap, but also what the heck's a concerto? Why can't we just call it Iggy's jam session on a little Vivaldi or something? And, I think that there are so many of those things built into our concert experience. And I think that's one of the things that, even look, the entire music world changed with the invention of the iPod Shuffle. Suddenly, you put your music on and you listen for 90 minutes, and it was never the same every 90 minutes. And I think we've experienced a little bit of that with our Sounds of the Resilience programming. We've talked other weeks about how, perhaps the programs wouldn't work for an in-person audience. But why is that? Are we now able to look at this whole experience through a different lens as we come out of the other side of this pandemic and can welcome an audience back? And the traditional concert will always be there, but I think that there's other aspects of what we do and how we communicate and how we, build an organization and build a symphony for the future that I think if you wanted to just drop a stack of those papers on a boardroom table sometime.
I also have one more suggestion. Can I make another
course.
suggestion? I think there should be, I'm not saying that it should be like this for every concert, but for some concerts, there can be more talk in terms of, not like this talk, but, some people read the program notes.
Yes.
Many people don't. And even when people do, many of these classical pieces are long. So if you're listening, even if, for myself, I read the program notes during intermission for the upcoming, symphony piece. But by the time, I'm like 25 minutes into the 40-minute piece, I would have forgotten what I read during the intermission. I can't remember all the details of like what to listen for.
Right.
So if somebody like you or whoever can talk about like what to listen for and pay attention to and what's interesting about this next piece, then I think that might,
And I would agree with you
attention.
if it was someone like Dave talking, because Dave is very communicative. I would think that if I talked a little bit, I think I would know what to say. But the person doing the talking has to be very skilled. And what happens sometimes in this industry is people who talk are people who like to talk, which means that they talk forever. And so that is one of the things that we have to be careful, because you want to keep the audience engaged. And the talk should be a teaser to want to listen to the music. Do you agree, Dave?
Oh, completely. Yes, absolutely.
No, but I'm being serious. I think, Dave,
Yeah.
you're always very... You find the right words to enhance the music, but I do think that sometimes conductors, to be a conductor, you have to have a good presence, and I would say that Joanne is very good when she addresses the audience, but it's an important topic that has to be dealt carefully. Dave mentioned the iPod Shuffle. Before the iPod Shuffle, you could argue that the previous revolution was the CD. And you wrote a book after the book you mentioned.
Thank you.
And that person
Subtly.
on that cover was a paramount importance. It's the growth of the CD, I believe. Or actually, LP with Karajan. But I recently, in fact, one of the positive episodes of this pandemic for me was to have read Dearest Lenny.
Thank you.
Written by your Mari Yoshihara. And so there have been many books about Bernstein, but nothing quite like what you wrote. Can you just tell us about the book?
So this book, called Dearest to Lenny, Letters from Japan and the Making of the World Maestro, is about Leonard Bernstein. And it's not just another biography of Leonard Bernstein. I wrote this book because when I was doing research at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., which houses the Leonard Bernstein collection, so all of his papers, both personal papers and business documents, that's a huge collection. I, by accident, came across these two sets of personal correspondence with Bernstein, two Japanese names that I didn't recognize. And so I requested to see these boxes of letters. And when I discovered these letters and who they were, I knew there was an extraordinary, fascinating and moving story. So the book uses the story of these two individuals' relationship with Leonard Bernstein to talk about both what Leonard Bernstein meant to Japan and the world at large, and many other topics. The changes in the music industry. Bernstein was a very political man, so Bernstein and politics, the U.S. government, Cold War, all of these things are intertwined with this very personal stories of these two Japanese people's relationship with Leonard Bernstein.
Well, but there's a lot more to it. You actually,
yes.
So you found all those letters
Yes.
at the Library of Congress, but you actually pursued them.
Well, so it turned out, so these two, just a very abbreviated version, because you should all buy and read the book.
And
Thank you very much.
We're getting some questions. Where can one do that here in Hawaii?
Purchase the book, you mean?
Yes, your book specifically.
My book. Well, you can. I think the shop at Kamuki has several copies. I'm pretty sure Barnes and Noble in Ala Moana also has copies, but you can also order them anywhere, online. Thank you.
It's called Dearest Lenny.
Dearest Lenny. Yeah. Yes. So these two individuals, just a very abbreviated version. So one is a woman named Kazuko Amano, and she was perhaps the longest and most loyal fan of Bernstein in Japan. She first wrote her fan letter to Bernstein in 1947. Kept writing, very passionate and thoughtful letters to Bernstein. And then in 1961, which was Bernstein's first Japan tour with the New York Phil, they met in person for the first time, and they became sort of close family friends. And this Kazuko remained a very most dedicated and loving fan of Bernstein throughout her life. Throughout his, he passed away in 1990. And so for decades, Kazuko was a very loyal fan through different stages of her life as well as his life. And then the other person is Kunihiko Hashimoto, who met Bernstein in 1979 at the end of Bernstein's, again, tour with the New York Philharmonic, and fell passionately in love with Bernstein, and wrote hundreds of love letters to Bernstein. And it was not just a one-way infatuation. The feeling was mutual. Bernstein brought him to Europe a couple of times to spend time together. And then Hashimoto eventually becomes one business representative for Bernstein in Japan. And so he was involved in organizing and execution of some of the very important projects in Bernstein's late life, like, for instance, the Hiroshima Peace Concert in 1985 and the Pacific Music Festival in 1990, which became a very important music festival. Some of the Hawaii Symphony.
In fact, if you remember, one of our guest conductors, Stuart Chaffetz,
yes,
is quoted in that book
yes,
because of his own experience with the Pacific Music Festival, correct?
Yes. Yes. So that Pacific Music Festival in 1990 is sort of the climax of this book. So Hashimoto was very centrally involved in that festival, and so a very special person for Bernstein as well, not just personally, but also professionally.
I'm just curious, and you don't have to dig too deep, but how did you manage to reach out to them, and once you were able to contact them, were they willing to share their stories, or were they a little bit more reticent?
Good question. So let's start with Mr. Hashimoto. So I found all these, very moving letters. I read them all. And then once I decided that I wanted to write about him, first of all, I found that he is living. He's an actor and writer, editor. He's involved in the arts. He lives in Sydney, Australia, which I knew from the letters. I didn't know whether he still lived in Sydney, but I found through online research that he still lives in Sydney, Australia, and is an actor and creative artist. And so I first contacted the Library of Congress, which, has the letters, asking if there are any issues with my use of the letters. And then it turned out that I was actually not supposed to see his letters. I was shown these letters by mistake on the part of the Library of Congress. They were supposed to be sealed until Mr. Hashimoto's death. But they realized that it wasn't my fault that I saw the letters. It was their mistake. And so they had to contact the Bernstein estate, the Bernstein office, and, consult with them about what to do. And then the Bernstein office contacted Mr. Hashimoto himself and then put me in touch with him directly. And then so I wrote this, long, careful email to Mr. Hashimoto and communicated. There was lots of back and forth. So this was 2013, I think, the summer of 2013 when I first contacted him. And he, make the long story short, at that time I simply asked for permission to work on the manuscript, and then with the understanding that if, once the manuscript is done, if there's anything that he doesn't want to, have published, then I won't publish it. I can't, both legally and ethically, I cannot publish anything that he doesn't give permission for. So he gave me that permission to at least work on the project. And then fast forward several years, I had the first draft of the manuscript, contacted him, and then requested that I be allowed to visit him in Sydney so that I can actually meet him, interact with him in person, which he was, very welcoming about. And so we spent quite a bit of time together in Sydney. He was very open and candid and warm and let me into his life in so many ways. I shared a lot of stories and memories and, ideas. He also shared lots and lots of ideas about my manuscript. And so there was a lot of back and forth about, not only about how I was writing about him, but about, the shape of the book and, how a good story, can be told. And, he played a very big role in making this book what it is.
Great.
So, yeah.
And
then for Kazuko Amano is older, and so I had a harder time, finding her because for much of her life she was a full-time housewife, and so she's not unlike Hashimoto, who is, who has a career as an actor, much harder to locate, right? And also several people that I interviewed for the research, who knew her, hadn't heard from her for a number of years. So many people had assumed that she had already passed. But it was actually Mr. Hashimoto, who also knew her a little bit, who found her old address and phone number and tried contacting her. And then lo and behold, she was still living and doing well in Tokyo. So I also went to visit her and met her and her daughter, who also briefly appears in the book. And so she's still living and doing well. So both of them individual, not only their letters and other documents, but they themselves as people very much informed.
And I enjoyed the book because I felt he had a very personal approach to the man himself.
I'm so intrigued. I can't wait to read this.
This is my Christmas present.
So well, thank
it's
you.
It's autographed and everything.
Oh, wonderful. Well, it is the holiday season, and if you do need some last-minute gifts here, like I do, really,
it's signed, so you can't give it to me.
I will not. I wouldn't dare. But thank you so much. It's so interesting the connections to Bernstein throughout the music world and beyond. I think that's the one that always impresses me. It's not just the musical connections, but how many people in so many other industries he touched and collaborated with. Mm-hmm. And we have a couple photos in our office of him here in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. At the Shell.
At the Shell and some other places around the island as well that we'll have. If you have not seen them,
I've seen one. Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, Mari, so you write books and you teach at university, but you actually have time to practice and perform. I've seen many of your recitals here. Maybe it's time to...
Iggy has been such a loyal
audience man.
Yes, he's come to my Iggy of all people has come to my
And so maybe we can give a couple special shout-outs. One would be to your teacher, because sometimes you
hi Tommy.
And then another one is because you're still very involved, you go see competitions, and I guess your partner Jun, who's here backstage, and also a very accomplished pianist, and the two of you have performed together. Tell us about what playing the piano, what part that plays in your life right now?
Yeah, so when I started working on music, my second book, Musicians from a Different Shore, which I interviewed you for, that's when I started getting back into music playing again. I played occasionally, but really, not taking lessons or not serious at all. But when I started writing about music again, I thought I should, get back into it myself. And then in 2009, I went to Fort Worth, Texas for about a month to do research on the professional clarinet competition. That's when Nobuyuki Tsujii, the blind Japanese pianist,
So he won in 2009.
And he and Hao Chen Chan, there are two winners.
Yes, and in fact, Hao Chen Chan came here, gave a recital.
Yeah.
Can you bring Nobuyuki Tsujii for the Hawaii Symphony and talk to Dave soon?
Yes, we may need to have a conversation
Okay,
off air.
I'll see
here.
what I can do.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, so I went to research that competition in 2009, and then I really got to know about the Cliburn, not only about Van Cliburn himself, but the Cliburn Foundation is a really kind of interesting and impressive organization in terms of how it's very grounded in the local community, and it's not just a premier musical event, but very community event, right? And so I ended up writing a book about the Cliburn in Japanese. That one is not available in English, but anyway, one of the things that the Cliburn Foundation does, in addition to the big competition, is an amateur competition. And so 2 years later, in 2011, I entered the amateur competition, and that's where I met Jun, my boyfriend, who was also a competitor. He played right before me, and he's like a whole different class of piano. I mean, he went to his conservatory trained and everything. I'm just like I'm an actual amateur pianist, but anyway, he really intimidated the shit out of me. But anyway, but we met and we're together 9 years later. So that's what.
And because of Van Cliburn, you got to meet Nobuyuki-san. You also got to meet Olga Kern, who's been our guest a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. So we're counting on you to keep those connections for the symphony.
Yeah, actually, a number of people I met through the Cliburn have been, like So-Yeon Lee, or Randan.
Very recently.
Yeah. John Nakamatsu also.
Of course.
Yeah, I've gotten to know, many of these people. So.
Wow. I'm speechless at the moment. You're so incredibly talented. I look forward to hearing you play the piano sometime very soon. We were gonna wheel the Baldwin out here, but we knew there was a Yamaha thing, so we decided not to. We didn't want mixed advertising, so.
So sorry, when you take piano lessons with Dr. Yi,
yes.
What does he tell you? Does he work on little technical things?
I think he's watching.
He knows that you are a professor,
yes.
PhD.
I hope he does.
You're not a student and who can spend 5 hours a day. Although I
hope he's listening.
I'm sure if I asked your neighbors, they would tell me that. In fact, you told me that your neighbor.
My neighbors
tells you what?
My neighbors are very understanding and supportive. Thank you, Prospect Tower people. I mean, I'm very lucky because I live in a condo. And when you live in a condo and practice piano, you worry, right? Because, you worry about the noise and stuff.
But did they actually tell you that they love the music, right?
Well, at least the ones that talk to me, yes. They're very sweet. People that I see on the elevator, and when they often ask, when's your next show, or can you play some more? Yes, we're looking forward
to a 2021 solo piano recital by Mari Yoshihara, Dr. Mari Yoshihara. Dave,
I can't wait. Well, we're quickly running out of time here. This has just flown by this evening. Really thrilled to have you and to meet you on the show here.
Thank you.
I look so forward to further collaborations. And what's the next book? Is there something in the works?
Well, right now I'm actually working on the Japanese version of Dearest Lenny.
Okay.
So that's what I'm working on most immediately. And then I'm also working on a bilingual novel, an autobiographical novel. So that's another project. And then after that, I'm thinking of writing a social history of piano lessons.
Ooh.
So
Wow.
3 years later, bring me back and I'll talk more about it. Yeah.
All right.
Right, we're on.
We're going to hold you to that.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be the very last tuning up for 2020. Iggy deserves a Tuesday off next week. I have been.
You deserve it.
Well, I think we both do. This has been 20 plus some odd weeks of this, probably more than that at this point, in 22. And really grateful for you all to be joining us for this. It's so important for us to continue creating community around the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra, be it through our music and through the personalities that are a part of this organization. So we feel you on the other side of the camera. Trust us, we do. And I wish we could have each and every one of you in this hall with us. And we will, again, very soon in the future here. I'm very optimistic for 2021. I'm really, again, proud of the work that we've done as an organization over the past 9 months. And I think that speaks very highly to what the future is going to look like for the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra and for music here in Hawaii. So as we wrap things up here tonight, I want to encourage you to tune in to our performance with Ron Artis II. The next broadcast will be on K5 on Christmas Eve, December 24th at 8 p.m. And that show will also be broadcast the following Monday at 10:30 p.m. back on the KGMB. You can also see our Nutcracker production with Ballet Hawaii, which will be on Christmas Day, December 25th at 7 p.m. and then Saturday at 3:30 p.m. The other thing I want to share is that along with our TV broadcasts, there has been an extended release with some behind-the-scenes footage and some additional material with Ron Artis that can be found on our website and through the Hawaii Theater Center box office. And again, this is a season of gratitude and giving, and we're so grateful for all the support that you've continued to give the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra. That fiscal support is the sail that takes us into 2021 and the return to in-person concerts. So thank you for that. Iggy, what's your New Year's resolution?
To be true to oneself, but hopefully that's not a resolution. That's a motto that I'm trying to keep for a long time. So
yeah,
here's to everyone, to the audience members,
yes,
to Dave.
Cheers to all of you.
Mari, and
yes,
to the Hawaii Symphony Orchestra.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Mari. Really appreciate it. And we'll have a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you in January.
Life changed so fast.
During COVID, we've had a chance to think about what's really important in our lives.
The arts are an expression of what it's like to be human.
To feel, to help us make sense of our world. Does it mean anything if no one sees it?
Training and dedication are stronger than any virus.
We all need to express ourselves.
Keep doing the things that make you happy.
So when the lights come back up,
we'll all be ready.
For the last 24 years, your nonprofit Historic Hawaii Theater has helped millions of people explore and experience the wonder of music, theater, and culture. From school plays to Broadway shows, from the Brothers Kaz to the Beach Boys, we've transported you from Hawaii to the moon and back. Won't you become a member today and help preserve this last remaining historic show palace? Go to hawaiitheater.com. Become a member today. We can't do it without your support. Mahalo.